Your video is freezing from time to time. How is it now? I think it's better now.
I
Can
don't
you?
know.
Okay. I've just closed absolutely every single other thing that's been open on my laptop. So hopefully this will prevent the video from freezing.
Yes. How are you? How is everything? It's been a while.
I know it has been a while. I'm good. I'm good, thank you. It's almost Ramadan. As you know, I'm Muslim, so I'll be fasting from next week. Yeah, it's been quite busy.
How is the weather in South Africa? What's the climate now?
I'm actually looking out the window right now, and the weather is definitely starting to shift. We are now having the last of our warm days, and soon it's going to be a lot colder. Yeah,
Now winter is coming for you. It's your turn.
the winter is coming, and I love summer so much.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah.
But good.
So
Yes.
yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I'm just noticing that at the moment it's nobody's online yet. Um, I guess you will open up with an introduction and then I'll probably like start, yeah? Or how do you want to do this?
Yes, I'll make a small introduction. We currently have 16 participants, and we're already
Mm-hmm.
23 at max. So we can start. Some colleagues are getting in a little late, but let's not waste on others' time as well. If it's okay with Esra too, we can give it a start.
Yes, please.
All right then. Welcome everyone once again. There are so many people that I haven't had a chance to meet in the orientation session. So my name is Cemre. I'm the UN representative of the Journalists and Writers Foundation. And once again, welcome everyone to the second session of the JWF Media and Communication webinars. Today we'll be focusing on citizen journalism with Yazeed Kamaldien, a freelance journalist from South Africa, a dear friend of mine as well. Yazeed, as you know, this is the second term of the webinars, and thank you so much for being with us again. It was wonderful to have you last year, and I'm so happy to see this year as well. And at this session, we have 23 participants joining the webinars from many different parts of the world, including US, Kenya, Nigeria, France, Norway, Egypt, Sierra Leone, Dominican Republic, and South Africa as well. So for everyone to know more about Yazeed, he's a journalist and documentary filmmaker from Cape Town, South Africa. His focus areas are social justice and human rights. Yazeed also reports on religion and culture as well, and he has many marvelous short films that are made of in Brazil, Turkey, Syria, and Cape Town. Um, he was in Yemen when he reported on the Arab Spring in 2011. He has also reported from Gaza Strip as well on various journalism scholarships. He received notably Duke Media Fellow at the Duke University in North Carolina. And he was the production manager of the Emmy Award-winning documentary film Miners Shut Down. So welcome in once again, Yazeed. Just as one last reminder before I leave the platform to you, I would very appreciate if everyone can open their video. That would be more interactive, if possible, please. And when you're not speaking, please keep your mics muted. And while Yazeed is presenting, he's going to have like a 35 minutes of a remarks time, but please write up your comments, questions in the meantime. So we pile up all of them together. And at the very end, let's open the platform for a discussion session. Let's involve everyone in, and I'll give the platform for everyone to raise their questions. But I would appreciate if you can write them down as well, so we know the sequence of the participants who would like to make an intervention. So Yazeed, once again, welcome in, and the platform is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon from Cape Town here in South Africa. I'm a journalist, and of course, you know a bit more about me now via the introduction from Chemre. I am going to start by just saying that I don't consider myself a citizen journalist. I studied journalism for 4 years, and I did a postgraduate diploma in media management here in South Africa at Rhodes University. I have, of course, used social media quite a lot for my work, my journalistic work, and I've lived in Yemen for 6 months during the Arab Spring. I've also lived in Sudan, and I've traveled widely. My work in Brazil, in particular, focused on social movements and their protest against the Soccer World Cup in 2014. And here in South Africa, I've also worked as a journalist for various newspapers, as well as more recently with a TV channel, TV news channel. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of that is because it has put me in contact with a lot of what is called citizen journalism and citizen journalists. Now, it's a phenomenon and a if I can say, a part of the profession that I choose to be part of. It is part of the journalistic profession that has become very prevalent with the onset and access of the internet. Now, before there was the internet, you know, the citizen journalist wasn't really part of the mix of what we know today as journalism. Before the internet, there was just the very traditional media, and there were gatekeepers. There were people who kept other people out of the media industry. When I say traditional media, I mean printed newspapers or magazines, radio stations, and of course also TV channels. Now, with the advent of the internet and blogging and vlogging, which is of course the video blogging on sites such as YouTube and even on people's websites and on other social media platforms, more people now had the power and the possibility to publish and produce their own content. Now, we are all exposed every day to a diverse range of voices and people who share various opinions. But now, as journalists, we are not in the business of opinions. We are in the business of fact. You know, how do we verify facts? We check and we double check and we even triple check facts before we publish something and put it out. You know, like if I wanted to know the weather in my country today, I could open the door, I could go outside, and I could look out onto the skies and I could see, okay, this is what the weather is like. So that is me checking the facts. Or I could phone the weather office in my country and in my city, and I can ask them, what will the weather be like for the next few days? And they've done that via scientific tools that they use, and they'll be able to tell me what the weather pattern will be for the next few days. So that's a scientific check. Yeah, I could also ask other people for information about what the weather is like. I'm sorry, I'm using a very simple example. I'm using a very relatable example. Other people could tell me what the weather is like as well. And that is what we do as journalists. We check and we check and we check again our facts, because we are in the business of facts. Yeah. Now, the citizen journalist is not always that interested or that, if I can say, able to check the facts or even get access to as many sources of information that the journalist is expected to do. So the citizen journalist, for example, maybe would just say, okay, I went outside and I saw the weather, and that's what the weather was like. They maybe don't check the facts with the weather with other people to make sure that they are in fact correct. And they might not even phone the weather office for the information about the weather. Now, of course, in this presentation, I'm not going to belittle the citizen journalist, and neither am I going to say that what they are doing is wrong. I'm just going to be speaking about the pros and cons of citizen journalism, and we can have a conversation about it. And of course, the pros and cons will be in relation to being a journalist working in the traditional, or even if I can say the formal or mainstream media sector. Now, we do know from the outset, let me also say that journalism can be influenced as well. We know that journalists have been influenced, and we see journalism practiced to various degrees of fairness, accuracy, and truth around the world. In some countries, you have journalists who sort of report in ways that can be very sympathetic or that can be very supportive of certain political ideologies, certain political movements. They even take, for example, a stand with a particular presidential candidate during presidential elections. This we see in all kinds of countries, whether they are self-proclaimed Western democracies, whether they are so-called third world or developing countries, or countries that deem to see themselves fairly independently in terms of, let's say, a middle ground. I also think that the journalist itself sometimes isn't always as informed or trained as what they should be. And unfortunately, we are seeing that here in South Africa because we have a situation in our country where the traditional media has been taking a knock. And when I say taking a knock, I mean money is not as forthcoming anymore from various sources for traditional media. And this could be from advertisers, or it could be from budget cuts from companies that actually want to make more profit. And what this means is that you have journalists working in newsrooms with less experience, less insight, and even less contacts. So they are having fewer resources, and their journalism is maybe not always as informed or as professionally conducted as one would hope, or as one would want to see within the context of professional journalism. So we have these challenges in journalism. I will not say that it is the norm, but I will say that it happens where journalism itself is under threat from journalists who are not always following the ethics and following the principles of journalism. Sometimes, like I said, the tools at their disposal hinder them from checking the facts, from getting all the information. For example, if you don't have a car to go and drive out to a scene to see what is happening, you are essentially going to be relying on a mobile phone or email or social media, and you are going to get information that way. However, if you are able to drive out to a scene, you could actually verify facts firsthand in a much more, if I can say, diligent way, maybe. But now I want to come to citizen journalism. Citizen journalism has been popularized since the start of the internet. And we know that there are many people and platforms and so many voices out there online that claim to also be journalists. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, we are in the business of facts. Now, citizen journalism is very important. I will not say that it does not play an important role in our society. The reason why I say it's very important is because for the first time, people, all people, anywhere in the world with access to the right technology, simple technology, mobile phones, smartphones, this is what everybody has, and an internet connection, have the ability now to tell their story from their perspective. And that enriches our understanding of the world. Everybody, we all love reading, we all love content, whether it's watching a video, whether it's looking at a meme, whether it's getting a WhatsApp, there's all this content coming at us all the time. So the citizen journalism, the realm of citizen journalism, offers so much content. And the beauty of it is that it's voices of people coming to us directly from the source, unfiltered, unedited, and unbiased from their perspective, right? So they are giving us their truth. The challenge, of course, is that it is very often a singular source of information that takes a particular narrative or storyline and does not enrich the conversation with multiple sourcing, accuracy, fact checking, and even following the ethics of journalism, which is to ensure that we have all sides of the story report fairly and accurately. We saw, for example, and I must say now, I lived in Yemen during the Arab Spring and reported on what was happening there. We saw many examples of people using the internet in the Arab world to tell their story. Again, it was important that they could tell their story. However, it was just one side of the story. The story was very complex. It was filled with many role players and many role players with their own agenda. So if I wanted to know the safety of what is happening in my country as a Yemeni, it would have been very difficult if I relied only on one source, and that being the citizen journalist, because that person would give me information from very likely a singular perspective, as opposed to a well-rounded, researched, and fact-checked article. Again, I'm not taking a punch at citizen journalism. I think citizen journalism is very important. But I think one of the biggest shortcomings of citizen journalism is that very often it's not multiple sourced or accurate. Now, I would like to also say that I am very open to being challenged on that, and I'm very open to seeing good, excellent examples of citizen journalism. And the reason why it's even called citizen journalism is because we have an understanding that it's very often from the ground. It's not from a perspective of authority. And that is what we need. We need more people speaking their truth and telling their stories, as opposed to always having the authorities telling us what they believe the truth to be and what they believe the world should look like. Now, I think that was a brief introduction, and I'm not sure, I'm not following the time, to be honest, but I'm very interested in hearing what other people have to say as well, and I am willing to take questions as well.
Thank you so much, Yazeed. Just maybe I can open up the first question. I was wondering, listening to you, how would you define a citizen journalist? Like, who is a citizen journalist? Are there any criteria? Like, if you like, I try to be very active in Twitter sharing news. At which point I can have this title of citizen journalism, or do I have to have a blog, or even if I have a blog, what is the frequency that I should be working on sharing news, or any other criteria that you would like to share?
Mhm. So it's such a fluid environment, you know. It's essentially anyone who's publishing news. So anyone who is going out into the world or in the community, looking at the world, hopefully critically, and getting information about that world and disseminating it via a platform. Now that platform could be the internet, it could be Facebook, it could be a website, a blog, WhatsApp. It's just such a fluid space at the moment, and with each new technology, the sort of the criteria shifts, you know. But what I would say the core function of the citizen journalist is to be a voice in their community. So you could be writing articles and disseminating it via Facebook. But essentially what you're doing is you are playing the role of a journalist. The big difference, though, of course, is that you are not publishing it via a mainstream media outlet. So it's not via a big broadcaster, it's not via an established newspaper. It's essentially taking the tools at your disposal, and sharing the news that way. So you are not going via a commercial platform. It's more the authentic, on the ground news that you're seeing around you. And the platforms are definitely not commercial and mainstream.
So it's by utilizing the already existing tools that one can have an access, and I believe it's more like being a responsible citizen, you know.
An active citizen. And a big thing about it is also that it's self-published. So
Mhm.
you or a group of you come together and you publish it yourselves. It's about taking back the tools, or rather not taking back, it's about taking the tools to assert your voice and your stories and your news, and in fact sometimes challenging the mainstream narrative and the authorities. And I think that's another powerful aspect of citizen journalism. They provide a counter narrative to the authorities. And in that way, they take power back as well. You know, it's about being an active citizen. So it's super important that the citizen journalist is also, one can say, a participant, you know, a participating voice in ensuring that we have democracy in our world.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I really like this topic, citizen journalism, because in this webinar too, we have many colleagues who are not journalists, students, or who are not young professionals doing journalism, but as being a stakeholder in the social economic development, we should be active agents, as you said, in the public sphere as well, sharing news, updating information, especially building a community. We have seen how the solidarity within a community changes everything, especially during the COVID-19, because there was this flood of information coming in from government agencies, and sometimes not, just the otherwise. We could not get any accurate information from the government agencies. And in that case, I think the local journalism representatives from the community themselves is playing a crucial role. And Harry has a question or any intervention that he would like to make.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so covering the Arab Spring wasn't exactly like a safe thing to do. It's in a lot of like cases there was like a lot of violence in the protests. A lot of times like the government would fight back against the protesters. How do you feel about like freelance and like citizen journalists going to those events? Considering like places like in terms of like covering Syria, a lot of news agencies aren't even like sending in journalists anymore from their companies. They're just sending in freelancers, and they're just like putting these like teenagers in there going like, all right, well, good luck. So what do you think like we could do to, kind of help this out? Like what can we do to keep journalists safe in dangerous environments?
Harry, are you saying that you are on your way to Syria?
No.
Did you just get a bright idea?
You know what, maybe. Maybe when it's cool
Okay.
there.
Excuse me?
Maybe when things calm down a little bit.
Okay. So, yeah, I've actually been to Syria in 2015. I went to a place called Kobane, and I may have shared the link with you guys. I traveled via Turkey to Syria, and I was looking at the impact of the Islamic State violence on people who were returning. Now, the question about safety in a war zone or a conflict situation is, unfortunately, as a journalist, you have to be very aware of the risk you are taking by going to those places. Even for myself, living in Yemen during the Arab Spring, I definitely saw bodies piling up. There was bloodshed. There was conflict. It was real struggles for power between different factions. And as you know, there's still a civil war in Yemen. There's still conflict in Syria. There's still conflict in Gaza. So these are three of the conflict zones that I traveled to. As a freelancer, you have to be actually super aware of the fact that more likely than not, you are going to be alone if anything happens to you. You need to have the right contacts and resources to ensure your safety. Your government might come in and help you. Your government very often will try to help you in some way. But remember, when you are out there in a conflict zone, you are on your own. You need to have the right resources. You need to have the right people that you can rely on. For myself, in my experience, I always make sure that I have local contacts, sorry. And of course, also the local context. You need to know the place that you're going to. You need to understand that going to Gaza, going to Syria, and going to Yemen is very different from going to the movies on a Saturday night. Okay? There's a real potential that you could get killed. And you need to be very aware that you're putting yourself at risk. There are various organizations that help journalists. There are various funds that help journalists travel to conflict zones as well. A quick Google search might help you. I didn't get any money or any support or anything like that from any of those organizations, but I am aware of it. I will also share that when I traveled to Tel Aviv, to Israel, I was in fact detained for 15 hours by the Israeli government or military. And I was interrogated multiple times because I'm a journalist and because my name is Yazeed and because I look the way I look and I'm Muslim and you know what's happening over there. The only help that I got was that I was informed that the South African ambassador tried to get in touch with me when I was detained because he wanted to make sure that I'm okay. The Israeli government did not allow access and I was deported. When I was in Syria, I contacted the South African government, which is based in Turkey, and I said to the government, I am in Syria or I am on my way to Syria. I'm just letting the government know that if I get caught or anything happens, I want you to know that there's a South African journalist here. Their response was, please be careful. We do know of other people who have been detained and they are still being held by the Turkish military. So one thing you have to know as a freelancer is that you are on your own. I would even go as far as saying, even when you're working for a big company, you are taking full responsibility for your life when you're reporting on a conflict zone.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
There,
Thank you.
yes, Harry, anything else that you want to add?
Oh no,
Also-
that's it. I was just saying thanks.
Okay, thank you. There are some more questions coming in, and just because you have mentioned about the resources, I want to ask a quick question. There's this Reporters Without Borders Committee to protect journalists, and they have great resources, training sessions available, especially in the very beginning of the COVID-19. I have seen several of them providing extra kits for kits of safety for local journalists. Do you know if such credible organizations are offering the same level of resources to citizen journalists as well, or do we have to have a press card or register in a mainstream media to use such resources?
So I have not personally worked with organizations that help citizen journalists, to be honest, but I do get a sense that there would be a very similar kind of support, particularly since citizen journalism is such a growing field. I do know that, I mean, maybe the citizen, can you please just mention those two names of the organizations again, please, Chimre?
Yeah, Reporters Without Borders, and there's the CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists.
Exactly. So, I mean, for even those organizations, they may even have, programs that focus on citizen journalism. It's something that has become more and more prevalent around us. And I feel that within the journalism community and journalism profession, there has been a bit of a tug of war, a bit of a challenge or a battle between the journalist working for the mainstream media and the citizen journalist. But I feel like that gap has lessened somewhat, particularly as, for example, when we go out on stories, we would actually even see people who, see themselves as citizen journalists out on stories and in communities. I'm not too familiar with organizations that may specifically help citizen journalists, but I think the CPJ and the Reporters Without Borders may have some programs, and if not, there should be others. Coming to the press card, so in South Africa, we have got something called the South African Print and Media Association. And when applying for a press card, you need to get a letter from an editor at a broadcaster or a TV channel, or so it's radio or TV or a magazine or a newspaper, stating in the letter that you are a freelancer and that you do get published by them, or that you do reporting for them, or if you are working full-time at an organization, your editor will send a letter. So there's a verification process to getting a press card. That's how it works in South Africa, at least. I'm not sure how it works in other countries. Now, fortunately, in South Africa, the media has got a lot of freedom. We don't have situations where there is the silencing of the media. We don't really have that in our country. So very often I could go almost anywhere and I won't even need a press card. I found that my press card is actually a lot more valuable when I'm traveling outside of South Africa. And that's when sort of like I show people I'm a journalist, this is my press card, it's a form of verification.
Mhm. Thank you so much. That was a very clear response. And we have colleagues writing up their questions in the chat. And to go from the order, Brienne, would you like to take the floor?
Sure. So I was wondering, in what ways can journalists work with citizen journalists to, enrich their own coverage or address some of the flaws that might be in some of the more widely circulated citizen journalism, like if it's spreading misinformation, for example.
Is it Brian? Brian?
Brienne, yeah.
Brian, I love this question. I really love this question because what we've seen with social media as journalists and what we know as journalists is that social media is actually where news breaks. Social media and citizen journalists often are the first to report news. So the symbiotic relationship has become really one where we as journalists need to acknowledge and work with citizen journalists because very often they are reaching niche audiences and they are reaching only their communities. So there is definitely a bridge that has been built between the citizen journalists and the mainstream media because very often citizen journalists would contact me and say, I was just at this place now. These people have been evicted. These are the videos. Can you help us get this into the media? It happens so many times. For example, you may even be following some Twitter accounts or some, I'm talking now in my capacity as a journalist, I may follow some Twitter accounts, I may follow some Facebook pages or have friends on Facebook of people who are citizen journalists. And they are really more than anything, more like community activists. They want to see justice for their communities, just as we as journalists want to see a more fair and equitable world, right? Especially journalists who report on daily news and social issues. Now, definitely, there is a need, or there is rather a way that citizen journalists can enhance the coverage and the representation of voices in mainstream media. And I think that is one of the strengths of citizen journalism, that they can actually enhance the way we do our journalism because they are embedded, they are part of the communities that they report on, and the information that they get is very often because of access, because they know people. If I had to walk into certain communities, people don't know me. Without having a source there, or without having set up some interviews or having made contact prior to my arrival there, some people might be skeptical of who I am and why I am there and what I'm doing there. It was like that when I went to Syria. There's no way that I'm just going to walk into Syria and get interviews with a multitude of people. I had to work via channels, I had to work via certain people. In fact, one of the persons that we met there was also a citizen journalist. And he was doing a lot of work to connect journalists from the mainstream media to local sources. Shall we go to the next question?
Yeah. Yes, sure. Samuel, would you like to raise your question to Yazeed?
Sorry, just reminding myself of the wording I used. How does the concurrent development of right now we're seeing also at the same time as we're seeing these ways to spread information through the internet and simple technology. At the same time, there's been increasing development in in more sophisticated video manipulation tools. So how does the knowledge that the video that you find might have not reflect reality affect how you treat videos found online?
So this is in the realm of fake news. Now we all know that this term has been so widespread and sometimes even misused. Sometimes certain global leaders have mentioned the words fake news to discredit journalism and to discredit journalists. And it's not to say that fake news does not exist. There is a lot of manipulation of content and information going on all the time, right? And it is unfortunate that as technology develops, on the one hand, it gives us access to more information. It gives us access to even a wider variety of voices and opinions to help us form our own opinion of the world and worldview. Unfortunately, the same technology that can be used for good can also be used for manipulation and fake news. There are a multitude of journalism-led or journalist-led organizations that have sprung up to in fact guide the public in particular on fake news and fake videos such as this. And it will require quite a lot of vigilance from our part as the media, as journalists. And once again, it comes down to the simple thing of check your facts, check your facts, check your facts. Somebody sends you a video, you have to go out there and make sure that you get multiple sources to verify the information. The obvious thing is if the video is about someone in power or someone that, for example, has influence, you go to that person, you show them the video, you check it with them. If you can't check it with them, check it with people close to them. They have spokespersons, they have publicists, they have organizations that they are part of. Then go to other sources. If you are going to publish information without checking the facts, I would actually say that you are doing a disservice to journalism.
Thank you, Yazeed. We have Melanie in line.
Yes, thank you. As you're speaking, I begin to kind of see a thread between vigilantes and citizen journalists. And I don't know if this is a crazy comparison or if there is some similarity. And if so, what can we learn from that?
So having covered conflicts in Gaza, in Yemen, and in Syria, I must say that I also lived in Sudan for 6 months. I've been someone who has been very interested in the Arab world, and it has taken my journalism career, has taken me to the Arab world quite often. And what I have seen is that because there is so much propaganda in the Arab world, and there is so much what one could say politics that masquerades as journalism in the Arab world as well, there's definitely a space where I would say organizations present themselves then as, let's say, acting in the interest of the public, but really what they are coming with is an agenda for the organization. Now, I haven't really found vigilantes to be posing as citizen journalists, but certainly there are organizations that are maybe always not acting in the interest of the public. I mean, in Yemen, for example, there was one of the factions that wanted to take power after the overthrow of the president of Yemen, Ali Abdullah Saleh. And what happened was, even before he was overthrown, they were beginning to claim space in the public imagination by presenting themselves, in a particular way, whether it was via social media or public events. And you could see that they were actually just part of the problem, in the sense that they were in fact arming, they were giving guns to people to overthrow the president. And yet they were presenting themselves as the better alternative. Now, as a journalist, I have questions about those kind of organizations that claim they are acting in democracy or that they are acting for the good of the people, because we have seen in the post-Arab Spring that so many factions that came to power were in fact oppressing other people as well. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very important to realize that when somebody says, I'm a citizen journalist, and when they're coming with a very nuanced perspective or a very one-sided perspective on a story, to check the facts and make sure that you also understand their agenda. Because not every citizen journalist out there, of course, they're not acting with the same kind of expected integrity and ethics that journalists should follow.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Melanie, for this wonderful question. Brienne also added another point at what stage a citizen journalist would be considered as a journalist, but I think you have already talked about it at a place where a person writes or delivers the news on a mainstream media or a broadcasting. We see this transition from being a citizen journalist to a professional journalist. But do you have anything else to add on?
Well, I will say that there have been what we've seen citizen journalists who have self-published content, who have very often been able to engage with the world through their own tools and share their voice, who have transitioned into mainstream journalism. And that is because they perhaps had the interest and the ability. Of course, once you get into mainstream journalism, the rules of the game change. You are not held to the same level of accountability when you are a citizen journalist. But when you work in mainstream media as a journalist, you need to know your ABCs. You need to check your facts. You need to make sure that you have multiple source stories. You need to make sure that you cover the news in a very neutral way. I won't say unbiased, because we know that every human being has a bias. I prefer to use the word neutral. You need to be neutral. You cannot be one-sided. You cannot be an activist when you are a journalist. You can be an activist when you're a citizen journalist. It's almost part of the job for many people. But when you enter the world of journalism, it is expected that you would be professional and that you'd follow the ethics and the standards required of journalism.
Yeah, that was a very important point. I think you added on being active, being an activist. Activism and being activists, quite different teams. So we really expect journalists to be neutral, and that's a very important fact. We have a colleague with the initials AI. Would you like to take the floor? I'm not sure about. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, my atmosphere is quite not conducive, but I will just chip in this. When you have information, as you said, unverified information from citizen journalists. So if you have first-hand information about something, to what extent should someone divulge that information, even if it is, a threat to a national security or to the global peace? So that's what I'm considering. Should a journalist divulge all he finds, or should he hold on to some things? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So in many of our countries, journalism is seen as one of the pillars of democracy. Journalism, the media is called the fourth estate, and it's seen as playing a significant role in ensuring that people have access to information, because the level of access to information you have will influence your consumer behavior. It will influence the way you think about politicians and the politicians that you vote for, contributing ultimately to the government and the structures within government. We also know that governments are meant to be transparent and they are meant to be accountable. And very often journalists are looked at or viewed as the people who would help the citizens keep governments accountable and transparent. Now, transparency here is the key word. If a citizen journalist has access to information that could place the security of the country or community at risk, I believe that that information should be shared. I do not say put your own life at risk, though. You do not need to go public with information or share anything that will put your life at risk. My philosophy in life as a journalist is that I need to live to tell the story. I've done some crazy things. I've honestly done some crazy things when I think back about it, the places I've been to. And I mean, it's kind of like, what the heck were you thinking? But I did it for the story. But one thing that was always in the back of my mind, or rather the front of my mind, was that you have to stay alive to tell the story. So that is a very responsible measure when deciding, should I send this information out? That is a super, super responsible way of making that decision. Now, as I mentioned, there are multitudes of ways of getting information out there without putting your life at risk. And I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. It does.
Thank you, Yazeed. And Sumaya, I see your question. Would you like to take the floor?
Hello.
Hi.
My question is, is citizen journalism role that can only be practiced in very limited ways? I mean, when we see like Turkey or China and the other countries like who oppress the freedom of speech. So are there any platform to citizen journalists to share their contents freely and safely And okay, that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah. So we do know that there are unfortunately countries that do not allow diversity of views and opinions and dissent. Most people in power don't want to be challenged. They love authority. They love being in power. They don't want to be challenged. And very often they don't want to give that power up. Now, I was born in Africa, in South Africa specifically. And on our continent, we've had many leaders who have been in power for decades. And obviously, the way that they have managed to stay in power was to make sure that there was no opposition. Essentially, they don't like competition. They like the spoils, they like the riches, they like the wealth, they like the privilege that comes with political power. Now, unfortunately, they will come for you if you are a dissident or if you are publishing content online or spreading information that challenges their authority. It's very difficult. Journalists face very real problems in places like Turkey. I have become aware, I've traveled to Turkey multiple times. In 2015 was the last time I traveled to Turkey. It was before the coup or the alleged coup in Turkey. And what we became aware of, that the government of Turkey, unfortunately, does not allow what we can say dissidents. They do not want people speaking against the current political regime. They put people in jail. You lose your jobs. Many Turkish people have actually left the country as well as a result. It's a political thing going on. The same could be said for China. The same could be said for North Korea. There are even, there are various places in the world where journalists and citizen journalists would be locked up for publishing information that challenges the authority. So what is the way out? Honestly, it's a tough one, but we have organizations, Chemre has mentioned organizations such as Reporters Without Borders. Now, I know that Reporters Without Borders, for example, they have offered safe spaces for journalists who need to get away out of conflict zones. I remember seeing something like that where they have actually said to journalists they can help them, if they are facing persecution or if they're facing threats. But the challenge is also, how do you get out of your country, right? When you're living in an oppressive regime state. It's challenging also because when you do start publishing information and once you share information, you don't know who's going to be accessing the information and tracing it back to you. It's a very tough question. I do think, though, that in that situation, very often the citizen journalist is also then an activist. In that situation, as you've seen in the Arab Spring, there were so many people publishing content and also citizen journalists who were going out doing interviews with people in Tahrir Square, citizen journalists sending videos to Al Jazeera, doing interviews with Al Jazeera. It's kind of like at that stage, the thin line between being a citizen journalist and an activist kind of like is blurred, and very often we see activists taking on the role of citizen journalists as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumaya. And last question we have from Joe. You can unmute yourself.
Right. It's about if you look at the background of such values as honesty, public interest, and dignity, and freedom also, how do you comment about the thin line between citizen journalism and the correlativity of duties and rights? The idea that every right implies a duty. So if I have a right to report this news, I have a duty to the public too, something like that. So how do you comment on that?
I feel that very often the citizen journalist acts out of public or civil duty. Very often the citizen journalist, much like the journalist, wants people to know about what's happening in the society. Now, I would say that unfortunately, the citizen journalist doesn't always carry the same level of responsibility or accountability. Remember, as a journalist, you can get fired if you have a report where news has been fabricated or where information has not been presented accurately, or if you have plagiarized, or if you have had a particular interest in a story and you didn't declare that, and the way that you reported was impacted by that interest, as a professional, you could lose your job, meaning you'll be without a job, you'll be without income, you'll be on the street. Now, very often that level of accountability is not there for the citizen journalist. And that's the big difference between the citizen journalist and the mainstream media journalist, right? Or the journalist who sees themselves as professional and conducting themselves professionally, as I've mentioned, with the various checks and balances and ethical guidelines. I do feel that the citizen journalist should be aware of the duty that they have, or rather the responsibility that they have, that comes with their right to share information, to publish information, to look critically at their society, to question the government, to question authority, to really go out into the world and be an active citizen, you know. But I think it's super important that citizen journalists also realize that the information they put out there does and can have an impact on our society and our democracy. So really, it's up to the individual. It's really up to the individual to make sure that they carry out their task responsibly. And like I said, with citizen journalism, there aren't the checks and balances. There aren't editors and sub-editors and the journalism industry that's going to be checking your story. For example, if you had to buy 3 different morning newspapers in your city, you would find that each story about a big event may be more or less the same, even if there are slight differences in the way it's presented. The facts are the facts, right? And that is what we are being held accountable to and what we are responsible for, reporting the facts. The citizen journalists can actually just share their opinion, and because they are publishing in the realm of citizen journalism, it's pretty much allowed.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Can I just add a quick one?
Yeah.
Yes, I liked it when you mentioned facts, because I think there's also the whole issue about, I mean, how does one interpret the facts available to them? If I'm a citizen journalist, I may not know how to interpret the facts. I may report things as I see them, and that may, you know, create problems for me or for the society, whereas a trained journalist would interpret things according to what is or according to the requirements. I think that's also something that I found important in your response to my answer.
Yeah. So for example, like, yeah, so like I mentioned about the weather, like the first step is going to be, I'm going to walk outside and I'm going to look at the sky and look around me and I'm going to see, oh, this is the weather. Then I could actually phone the weather office, the scientific office that monitors the weather, and then they could tell me this is the weather. On top of that, I could go to secondary and third sources and say to them, what is the weather? And in that way, I've checked and double checked my facts without just going ahead and publishing my opinion. This is the weather. It's a simple example, but it shows the role and how we do our job as journalists.
Thank you, Joe, for the question and follow-up comments. And time flew by in this session because of this lively conversation. Thank you, everyone. Any last comments, questions, or goodbyes for Yazeed? Anyone? Before we...
Thanks for the conversation.
Thank
Cool,
you.
Harry,
It was
let
nice.
us know how it goes in. Harry, let us know how it goes in Syria.
Yazeed, any last words you have? Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, look, I don't have that much more to add, but I just want to say that if there are any citizen journalists in the group or journalists in the group, I hope that my thoughts have helped you, you know, to gain a better understanding of our profession. I think journalism is a super exciting lifestyle. It has been who I am for most of my life, and it's something that I will still do. Yeah, I think once you're a journalist, you're always a journalist. I'm very passionate about this profession. I really love it. And I love the life that I've been able to live through my journalism career. So I just want to give words of encouragement to anyone on the group who's a journalist and also a citizen journalist. I think that we have a very important role to play in our societies. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yazeed, and everyone is also writing up in the chat about their how enjoyable the session was, and it's always a pleasure to have you on board, Yazeed. And thank you so much, everyone, for your active participation. It was delightful to listen your questions, comments, and we're gonna see everyone next Saturday. So good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us to today's session. So I hope to see everyone next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.